It's my nerd world, and welcome to it, a Star Wars show, and we've got a lot of ground to cover. Some big news this week. The first movie to return to the big screen in the Star Wars universe will be a Mandalorian and Grogu film. I'll have details on that. The Game of Thrones creators reveal why they left their Star Wars project, and your listener feedback this week. As always, if you want to support My Nerd World, head on over to mynerdworld.net or go to amazon.com and check out the EMBARK science fiction space opera series. If you like to read and you love Star Wars, you definitely want to check out EMBARK. Again, available at amazon.com or mynerdworld.net. Now, let's get to this week's show.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My Nerd World.
Just let it in.
And welcome to it, a Star Wars show. I'm your host, Jon Justice, and thank you so much for checking out another episode and giving some of your valuable time to the show. I greatly appreciate it. Let's start things off here, though. First off, last week's show was not without its fair share of controversy. Let me just say that some listeners of the show felt,
This is not going to go the way you think.
and while I know it wasn't typical fare for this podcast to go the route that I did last week in my criticism of the comments of the upcoming Rey film director, Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy, I also call it as I see it. Now, this, of course, rocked the Star Wars world with the comments that she made, and as a matter of fact, in my opinion, brought about the announcement that we got this week. Disney seems desperate to go and change the story, and why wouldn't they? They were getting a lot of criticism over the comments by this upcoming director. I don't think this director will end up staying on this film. We'll see if the distance that Disney has now given the Rey film changes the trajectory for that film and its director. I will say that her comments were simply disappointing, and I disagreed with them, in my opinion. Will I still see this Rey movie? Absolutely. Am I excited for this Rey film? You betcha I'm excited for this Rey film. Daisy Ridley, Rey Skywalker, is one of my favorite characters is my favorite character of the sequel trilogy, and honestly, one of my favorite characters in Star Wars. I'm excited over the fact that they're looking at telling a story after the events of The Rise of Skywalker, a movie that I also loved. I just didn't appreciate the comments by this director, which caused a bit of controversy, so if you want to see for yourself, head on over to the comments on my YouTube page, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Thankfully, this week, though, we have some really fantastic news as Disney, Lucasfilm, announces the first movie back to the big screen isn't going to be the Rey film, isn't going to be the Dave Filoni Mandoverse film, isn't going to be James Mangold's first Jedi movie. No, it's The Mandalorian and Grogu.
We are the spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down.
From StarWars.com, The Mandalorian and Grogu are embarking on a new adventure. To movie theaters, directed by Jon Favreau, produced by Favreau, Kathleen Kennedy, and Dave Filoni, The Mandalorian and Grogu will go into production in 2024. Hey, that's this year. I have loved telling stories in the rich world that George Lucas created, said Favreau. The prospect of bringing The Mandalorian and his apprentice Grogu to the big screen is extremely exciting, says the press release. Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni have ushered into Star Wars two new and beloved characters, and this story is a perfect fit for the big screen, added Kathleen Kennedy, the president of Lucasfilm. The Mandalorian and Grogu will lead the feature development slate, including the films held by Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy, James Mangold, and Dave Filoni, as I just mentioned, who is currently developing Ahsoka Season 2 among those in the works, which is fantastic news for me. If you've listened to the show at all, you know what a fan I am of Season 2. The press release wraps up with, "This is the way." All right, so there's a number of things that I want to cover with regard to this news, which has me really excited. First off, currently the title, as released in the press release, is The Mandalorian and Grogu. That's the name of the movie. Now, whether that changes remains to be seen. I think this will more than likely be the title, and it makes the most sense. This is what people are most familiar with. When you're looking at the casual fan, and not the fan that listens to a show like this, they know who the Mandalorian is. They know who Baby Yoda, now Grogu, is. Oh, it's a Mandalorian Grogu movie. To those who say it's kind of goofy, the Mandalorian and Grogu, put the Star Wars in front of it. Star Wars, the Mandalorian, and Grogu. Picture the logo in your typical Star Wars font. I like it. I think it works. Now, in terms of the release date, before we get into the story aspect of what this movie could be, it's going into production this year. Hopefully, they decide to go to physical locations as opposed to relying solely on the volume like they did for the television show. Now, I will say that Jon Favreau, especially in Season 1 of The Mandalorian, utilized this new LED Real Engine 5 technology of the volume. And again, for those that aren't familiar with this, this is the advancement beyond what they used to use with the green screen. It's a gigantic soundstage where it's surrounded on the sides and up above with massive LED screens. They use this video gaming platform called Real Engine, where what you're viewing in camera adjusts the video images, the photoreal images in the background and above, to the parallax of the camera shift to make it look like they're on a real set or at a real location. And it's been used in virtually all of the Star Wars Disney Plus live-action streaming content. The one that didn't utilize it nearly as much or hardly at all was Andor. And it absolutely showed. The production work on Andor is far beyond and better than what we got in Kenobi, The Book of Boba Fett, The Mandalorian, and Ahsoka. Kenobi utilized the volume technology the worst, in my opinion. I think a lot of that had to do with COVID. I think that a lot of that had to do with the minimal staffing and the direction. I thought that it was utilized decently in Ahsoka, still very much television. I've been doing a rewatch of The Book of Boba Fett as of late, and been enjoying it more than I had in the past. So there's some wonky moments in The Book of Boba Fett in terms of its production work, beyond the storytelling problems that I had and sort of the lackluster finale in that. But there's a jerkiness and a jankiness to Robert Rodriguez's film style that's apparent throughout the show. But I have been enjoying a rewatch on it. However, Jon Favreau really did the best job of utilizing the volume, especially when you go back and watch Season 1. And that first episode of The Mandalorian, I mean, that is big screen material for me. So I imagine with a massive budget, which this will probably have, not on par with, say, your Indiana Jones of your $300 million production, I think that this will look amazing on the big screen, but hopefully they go to some real locations. In terms of a release date, most people seem to be eyeing May of 2026, and that makes the most sense to me as well. If this goes into production this year, you could potentially get it done, depending on how fast they work, and conceivably they would have a majority of the pre-production already done because of the production work that's taken place on the previous 3 Mandalorian seasons. But we have the next Avatar film, number 3, coming out in December of 2025, which would be most likely the earliest they could get this film out. I suppose there is an argument that could be made that it could be released summer of 2025, but that's a year out from now, and unless they are way into pre-production on this, I doubt that's going to happen. My expectation is with a lot of other commentators, and that is a May 2026 release. Now, that could lean into a Rey movie in December of 2026, potentially. However, we're finding out now that Stephen Knight, the writer on that film, after Damon Lindelof, the previous writer, left the project, reportedly has yet to even turn in his new Jedi Order script for that film. And given the controversies around the director and how much commentary has been around those controversies of her comments of making men uncomfortable in past interviews and her lack of pointing to previous directors, content creators, and writers who are female in the Star Wars universe, it seemed pretty clear this announcement coming out this week was an attempt to change the conversation, and it absolutely did that. And that movie, if the script isn't even finished yet, is being pushed off to the side for right now. But let's get into another aspect of this too. Does this lead into, say, Ahsoka Season 2? Does Ahsoka Season 2 come first? My expectation is Ahsoka Season 2 would come first. And I'm mentioning this because I want to talk about the story, and you may say, well, of course the story's important. Well, the story's going to be more than important for The Mandalorian and Grogu. Now, we don't know if we're getting another Mandalorian Season 4. There were some rumors coming out that The Mandalorian Season 4 would actually be turned into a movie. However, there's some reporting by Deadline saying that The Mandalorian Season 4 is actually still taking place, and this is a completely separate project and story all on its own. My expectation is Ahsoka Season 2 would come first, perhaps in late 2025. As a part of this announcement that I read, Ahsoka Season 2 is in production, and my expectation on the story for Ahsoka Season 2 is going to be Ahsoka and Sabine obviously on Peridia, but maybe a reverse of what we saw in Season 1, where it's going to be getting them back from that other galaxy far, far away, and then returning to deal with Thrawn in the movie version of what Dave Filoni will produce later on, perhaps in 2027, maybe even going to 2028, as he wraps up the Mandoverse with his film that brings in all of the characters that we've been introduced to in the Mando universe. Now, that being said, Ahsoka Season 2, if it does come first, say, late next year, prior to the May 2026 release of the Mandalorian and Grogu film, maybe there are aspects of Ahsoka Season 2 that lead in and set up the Mandalorian and Grogu. I envisioned as well the potential that maybe the Mandalorian and Grogu are the ones that go to try to get Ahsoka and Sabine back from that other galaxy far, far away. But given the timeline to wait until 2026 and then have the Mandalorian and then Ahsoka, that doesn't make any sense to me. So again, my expectation is Ahsoka Season 2 first, late 2025, the release of the Mandalorian and Grogu in May of 2026, capitalizing on, say, May the 4th. My biggest question in this whole thing is, what's the story here? It has to be something special. When you consider the films in the Star Wars canon, they're all very special in their own way. Whether you're talking about the sequel trilogy that is telling the Skywalker saga story, Rogue One, we're talking about the story of stealing the Death Star plans leading into the very first Star Wars movie. The one movie being Solo, a Star Wars story, where you could say that the story wasn't really all that special, doing that thing with my fingers, meaning it didn't have larger repercussions for the galaxy at large. It was more of just of this singular tale. But it was about Han Solo, and that was intended to be the draw. We're seeing and watching Han Solo's origin story, even if it didn't do as well at in the box office as they expected. With The Mandalorian and Grogu, I feel like there needs to be larger galaxy implications rather than having this film be a 2-hour plus movie version of what we get and what we've received in The Mandalorian's in The Mandalorian seasons 1 through 3. Now, what that would be, I don't know. With the Mandoverse being what it is and Thrawn being developed into the Empire, if you will, or First Order of this particular storyline, perhaps it has something to do with that. That's what got my mind thinking that maybe this story would be about the Mando and Grogu being the ones that have to go and get Ahsoka and Sabine from Peridia. But again, keeping with the timeline of when this is going to be released, I doubt that's going to happen. Now, the other part of this I wanted to mention as well is that with The Mandalorian and Grogu coming out in May of 2026, that puts a couple of years since anybody will have seen any stories of The Mandalorian and Grogu. Considering we don't get additional scenes, episodes focusing on these characters like we did in the Book of Boba Fett, whether it's in an Ahsoka Season 2 or Skeleton Crew, and I can't see those stories particularly overlapping. We had The Mandalorian debuting in March of last year, so you're looking at all of 2023, no Mandalorian stories this year in 2024, no Mandalorian and Grogu stories in 2025, so you're looking at almost 3 years without having The Mandalorian on any screen whatsoever. That in and of itself, depending on what the story is, may be the intent of the draw, and perhaps this will be a story more in line with what we saw in the first 3 seasons, where it's just a larger adventure with The Mandalorian and Grogu that doesn't have major galaxy-reaching ramifications, and the storytellers at Lucasfilm are just considering it'll be 3 years. The Mandalorian has been our most popular show and character, along with Grogu, beyond the sequel trilogy. People will be clamoring to go to the movie theater and see The Mandalorian. Listen, I'm excited for it. I think it's a really smart move. I talked about this last week, that Charmin Obaid-Chinoy, despite and before her stupid comments, she's entitled to her opinion, but I think they're dumb, that she wasn't a good director for this first Rey film post the sequel trilogy. That they should go with somebody well-known, unless this director was coming in and picking up where another director had started the story. Kicking things off with The Mandalorian, and specifically having Jon Favreau, is a pretty brilliant move. When you consider the work that he's done before, his films before, they haven't all been winners, but Iron Man, that original film kicked off what became of the MCU and the massive successful run in those first 4 phases of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The guy tells great stories. And I can envision a Mandalorian story that runs kind of the same way that original Iron Man movie did, where maybe we get a bit more background on the Mandalorian after he joined with the Mandalorians. Maybe we get a bit of background on how he ended up getting the Razor Crest, and that ship ends up making a reappearance. Maybe we get more background, and the story revolves around the time when Grogu was rescued from Order 66 and where he'd been all these years. And we get the flashback type of storytelling that Jon Favreau did in Iron Man. Jon Favreau is a great director, so I'm excited about this, and the story must be something special if Lucasfilm, and particularly Disney, who've taken just a massive PR hit as late, if they're using this as their launch vehicle, some 7 years, and being the first movie in 7 years, first Star Wars movie in 7 years to hit the big screen, since The Rise of Skywalker, which left everybody with kind of mixed reviews, then this story is probably something pretty unique. And I, for one, clearly am really excited to hear what it happens to be. The good news is, with the way that things get leaked these days and this production starting this year, we'll probably know sooner than later what the loose elements of the story of The Mandalorian and Grogu are going to be. Either way, what do you think? Are you excited about this? Does this Mandalorian and Grogu movie get you excited as being the first Star Wars film that we will get to go to the theaters to see since The Rise of Skywalker? Drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or leave a comment up on YouTube. I would really love to know what you think.
Something inside
inside me has always been there. But now it's awake. And I need help.
From The Hollywood Reporter, Game of Thrones creators talk about their abandoned Star Wars project. Star Wars fans, about 3 years ago, were excited by the idea of the Game of Thrones guys bringing their grounded fantasy dynamics to a galaxy far, far away. Yet the movie was shelved along with other Star Wars projects from other top creatives like Kevin Feige, Patty Jenkins, and Damon Lindelof, who I mentioned earlier. Benioff of Benioff and Wise says, "We wanted to do The First Jedi." This, of course, is going to be what allegedly the James Mangold of Indiana Jones, The Dial of Destiny, and Ford versus Ferrari fame says that he is supposed to be writing. Basically, how the Jedi Order came to be, why it came to be the first lightsaber. And we were annoyed as hell when Rian Johnson, the duo's longtime friend and fellow producer, ended up calling his movie The Last Jedi. Weiss said he completely destroyed the obvious title for what we were working on. So the implication there is that because Rian Johnson called his film The Last Jedi, they didn't want to call their film The First Jedi, which I don't necessarily agree with. I think he could have done it and it would have been a nice book ending, but be that as it may. Asked about what went wrong, Benioff says, Lucasfilm ended up not wanting to do a First Jedi story. We had a very specific story idea in mind, and ultimately they decided they didn't want to do that, and we totally get it. It's their company and their IP. But we weren't the droids that they were looking for. Their overall concept, again, might still happen. When last year, Lucasfilm announced a movie that they loosely called Dawn of the Jedi from director James Mangold. We'll see if that takes shape. They announced it in the press release for The Mandalorian and Grogu. But again, I think a lot of things are in flux right now with CEO Bob Iger coming back and probably wanting to, one, redeem himself after what happened when they forced the Solo movie to be released so closely to the release of The Last Jedi, but also knowing that he's achieved success before with what took place with The Force Awakens. I'll tell you personally, a First Jedi film doesn't really get me excited. I'll watch it, don't misunderstand. I'll report it on the show. I'll, look into it. I'll eventually get excited when it comes out. But if you're asking me on my list of ideas for Star Wars films, what are your thoughts, Jon Justice, on a First Jedi film? I kind of go, I'm not really all that excited to go and see that. But that's also without seeing any of what it could potentially be. As always, what say you? TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. Before I move on to our listener feedback this week, I want to encourage you that if you're a reader and obviously you like science fiction, I hope you'll go and check out the first book in my science fiction space opera series, EMBARK. There are 7 books available in the series. But take a moment, go to Amazon.com or to mynerdworld.net and pick up your preferred version of Book 1 in my science fiction space opera series. I wrote this because of my love of Star Wars. I wanted to know what it was like to create my own space opera, knowing that I didn't want to place it in a galaxy far, far away because so much of that gets compared to Star Wars. Look at what happened with the Zack Snyder Netflix movie of Rebel Moon, which was a massive disappointment to me. If you want to hear my thoughts on that, I have a separate space opera podcast. If you look under My Nerd World, a space opera show, you'll find it there. I give you my extensive thoughts on that particular film on Netflix. Unfortunately, because that was originally supposed to be a Star Wars film, it'll be endlessly compared to Star Wars, and it was, and it just didn't live up to the mark. When I wrote my story, I wanted to write a space opera. I wanted to write something fun and adventure like what George Lucas did, but I wanted to make it unique and my own. I decided to set it in a future on Earth, with Book 1 being the story of how humanity got off Earth and then went deep into the galaxy and colonized distant worlds, which expands into a grand space opera adventure tale. So I hope you'll go and check out Book 1 in my science fiction series, EMBARK, Book 1. In the wake of a catastrophic industrial accident, the collapse of the planet has begun. Amid the growing chaos, Taft Guardia and fellow starfighter pilot Keith Amaro uncover a shocking secret. left behind by her late aerospace engineer father. With two rival megacorporations on the brink of interstellar war, Taft Keitha and their ragtag crew test their discovery, mistakenly drawing attention to its power. Now, the factions at odds will stop at nothing to obtain the one thing that could thwart their efforts. With Earth's evacuees facing annihilation, can Taft Keitha and a brave resistance save humanity before it's too late? Treat yourself, a friend, or a family member with science fiction. All the stories in my series and EMBARK Book 1, written for adults, but great for ages 11 plus. You can pick them up in hardcover, paperback, audiobook, ebook, free on Kindle Unlimited, and you can actually purchase all the books and Book 1 directly from me. All you got to do is email TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. If you like your science fiction space opera to be epic, filled with some romance, a ton of action and technology, EMBARK is perfect for you. Again, on Amazon.com or mynerdworld.net. Take a moment and go pick up Book 1 on ebook. For less than $3, I know you'll enjoy the story. I had a blast writing it, and that's why I ended up writing 7 books in all in the series, and I hope you'll take a moment, at least check the books out and pick up Book 1 for yourself, a friend, or a family member. All right, let's get to your listener feedback this week.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
Friend of the show, Howard Kemple, writes, I wanted to talk about Sabine. I'm finally writing now. I was originally of the thought that Sabine didn't have any Force powers. It's not that I didn't want her to be gifted in the Force, but everything seemed to lean on her not being gifted. I felt reinforced by this when she was fighting Shin Hati in Episode 4. When she attempted a Force push on Shin, I saw it as Shin flinching, expecting a Force attack by Sabine. Hence why she said, "You have no power." I watched it several times, and now, of course, I was pleasantly disappointed when Sabine's powers became more pronounced toward the finale. Like I said, I wasn't against her being gifted in the Force. For now, I sit quietly and wait for some Star Wars cinema content. Like you, it has been a long, fun ride since a 4-year-old me sat in the theater with my dad back in 1977, getting Obi-Wan and R2-D2 as my first action figures when they came out, because that was all that was available at Kmart, and wearing out those pirated VHS copies of the original trilogy. In the meantime, I will wait and continue to rewatch what's out now and collect my Lego Star Wars sets. My wife and kids are too kind to me by helping me hunt down certain sets. I think I know what I'm getting for Christmas, and he was right, because he ended up emailing me and telling me that he did get another Lego set for Christmas. But for now, thank you for continuing your podcast. It has helped me listening to someone close to my age who enjoys Star Wars and Depeche Mode as much, if not more, than me. Please keep it up, and a Merry Christmas to you, your family, and the many friends of the show, and may the Force be with you. Respectfully, Howard. Thank you, Howard, for that. Glad to hear that you're doing well and that you had a great Christmas, and we did here too. I've been back on a Star Wars kick as of late, and just decided to go back and start watching the live action shows. I was on my, 5th or 6th watch of Ahsoka, and decided to do a revisit to the Book of Boba Fett, and actually found myself enjoying it quite a bit. And as soon as I wrap it up, I'm actually going to go back and watch Season 3 of the Mandalorian. All right, let's get to our next listener feedback this week. It comes from Kevin F., friend of the show. Happy New Year. I just heard you talking about physical media on your show, and even though streaming is going to be the future, of course, discs, one way or another, will be around for some years to come. Please get anyone to watch The Mandalorian Season 1 on 4K disc through an OLED TV with a decent sound system. Then watch it again through the streaming service. See if it sounds and looks as good as the disc version. They will notice a difference because the disc versions are better. Let's hope the Depeche Mode devotional tour comes out on 4K or Blu-ray soon. Speaking to Depeche Mode. Thanks, Kevin F. Yeah, it was funny. We were actually out at Best Buy, and Walmart's going to be the last place where you can go and buy physical media in the near future. Best Buy announced that they were going to be selling Blu-rays and DVDs. Target, most of their stores have already stopped selling Blu-rays and DVDs. Walmart has actually gone and purchased a distributor of Blu-rays and DVDs, anticipating that those other chains would be dropping them, and they would be the ones that would be delivering, be the one of the few outlets left delivering physical media. So Kevin's right. We will be getting physical media for a while. It just won't be as available as it was before, and probably the prices are going to go up. I need to pick up The Mandalorian Seasons 1 and 2 on Blu-ray. I definitely want to have those on physical media, and eventually I'll end up picking all of those up, even though we own Disney Plus. I think the goal would eventually be to drop Disney Plus if we could, depending on how much of their physical media they put out. But I'm keeping it for now because I love my Ahsoka. Lastly, we hear from friend of the show, SheVP. With regard to the controversy last week and my comments about the Rey film director Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy, SheVP writes this: I'm with you, John. All I want is good Star Wars. As a woman, Lucasfilm are the last ones that need to preach to me about the empowerment of women. When one of our own stood up and used her voice for what she thought was right, they fired her, being Gina Carano. As far as I'm concerned, they can kindly take several seats. I'll tell you, too, that I know it'll never happen, but wouldn't it be fantastic if they brought back Cara Dune and Gina Carano for the Mandalorian and Grogu film? I know it won't happen. I wish that it would. I loved her character on that show. She got the shaft by Disney and Lucasfilm, and it's just a bummer is an understatement of what happened to her. Hopefully she's happier with the work she's doing now, but as I look at my little mini poster here sitting off to my desk that has Cara Dune on it, and I look at my Black Series figure in my collection, I wish that we could get her back into the Star Wars universe, because I really thought that character was a bonus to the show, and I really missed her presence in that Mandalorian Season 3. That wraps up the show for this week. Again, head on over to Amazon.com or MyNerdWorld.net and pick up book 1 in my science fiction space opera series, EMBARK. I'll tell you, there are a few things that really get my dopamine going and make me happy than when I go and post a new show and I see that you have gone and purchased some books. Now, if you've already gone and done that, thank you so much for doing so. I appreciate it. Be sure you leave a review for any of the books that you purchased. I could really use reviews for all the books, but definitely 2 through 7 in the series. I hope you'll take a moment and go to Amazon.com and just drop a review for any of those books, even a rating. I would greatly appreciate it. And again, if this is one of your first times listening and you enjoy reading science fiction, go check out my book 1 in my science fiction space opera series, where you can follow a ragtag squadron of pilots and one reluctant hero on a journey of survival across the galaxy as they fight for humanity's future and their own among the stars. That wraps up the show for this week. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com is the email address. I hope wherever you are, you're happy, you're healthy, and you're safe. I'll talk to you next week. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.